Hi, it's John, and in this video we'll be looking at how I set up the customizable buttons on the Fuji X-M5. But let's spend a minute taking a look at what I take photographs of and how I shoot, as this informs how I set up the camera. So I bought the X-M5 as an everyday carry camera for when I don't want to take a larger system camera with me. And I like to grab casual pictures of my kids and their activities, so I need something that is flexible and responsive. I generally shoot in manual mode, and I almost invariably shoot in continuous AF with zone focusing. I don't use back button focus as I prefer focus activation on the shutter button. If you do like to use back button focus, it's straightforward to assign it to another button. To set it up, go to the wrench menu and then the button dial settings and choose Shutter AF. Here you can activate or deactivate focus on the shutter button. So for back button focus, choose off. In function settings, you can choose a button and select AF on for back button focus. The AEL AFL button seems to be a great candidate for this. With all this in mind, let's get into how I set up the custom buttons on the X-M5. Enter the wrench menu setting and then button dial settings. The top item is the focus lever, which is essentially the joystick. I have the press function set to recenter the focus zone area, and the tilt function moves the focus zone around the frame. If you spin the front or rear dial while the zone is highlighted in green, you can cycle between the available zone options. In this video, we'll skip the Q menu. I can cover this area in a separate video if you'd like to see it. Let me know in the comments. Before we customize the buttons in the function setting, let's turn on the ability to assign 4 functions to the touchscreen. This will allow us to access those functions just by swiping on the monitor. So scroll almost to the end of the button dial settings and access touchscreen settings and access touch function and turn it on. Now let's scroll back to the function settings and customize the buttons. Firstly, I have the rec button assigned to white balance. When in movie mode, I use the shutter button to start a recording, which frees up the rec button. So press OK and scroll to white balance. When you press the rec button to change the white balance, you can either use the joystick or the rear command dial to make your selection. I prefer using the command dial as the joystick can sometimes be less precise. Okay, next up is the X-M5's infamous Q button. The Q button is difficult to access for most typical sized humans due to its fiddly size and location, so I've assigned the Q menu to another spot. We'll get to that shortly. I've assigned the Q button to AE lock, which can come in useful if the exposure metering gets heavily influenced by, say, a backlight. Here I'm framing the image so the chair fills the frame. As I tilt upwards, the window influences the scene. If I fill the frame with a chair, hit exposure lock and then reframe, I maintain the exposure value of the chair. I have the AE AF lock mode set to on-off switch option, so it locks the exposure until I press the Q button again. Next is the touch function 1, which I have set to access the Q menu. When I swipe up, it opens the Q menu directly. I find this much easier than jabbing the Q button with my fat fingers. It would be nice if you could swipe up again to dismiss the menu, but this currently doesn't work. Next, I've assigned touch function 2 to toggle subject detect on and off. When using subject detect, I'm generally in animal mode, and swiping to the left allows me to directly access this mode. Similarly, I've assigned touch function 4 to toggle face detect on and off. Given most of my photography is of people, I really like having direct access to this feature, and it's easy to move between face eye detect and animal detect, or turn it off completely by a single swipe. And coming back to touch function 3, I have this set to directly access my custom 1 setting. I have custom 1 set up as a general video mode. This gives me immediate access to video without having to spin the mode dial. Okay, next I have the AEL AFL button set to ISO. And like selecting white balance, I can either use the joystick or the rear command dial to make a selection. Okay, that's us done with the function settings menu. It's great how customizable this little camera is, but it would be nice if you could customize the drive button too, but Fuji doesn't give us that option. Now let's go to the command dial settings. My P, A and S settings are pretty much identical to each other. I use the front command dial to change the priority value and the rear dial for exposure compensation. For instance, here in shutter priority, I can change the shutter speed using the front command dial. Fuji allows us to press the front command dial to additionally select exposure compensation, ISO and film simulation. It's a known issue with the X-M5 that the front command dial spins a little too freely and is too easy to press in to change function. So for shutter priority, I've deselected all but the shutter speed option, as I don't want to accidentally jump to another parameter. Given that film simulation already has its own dedicated dial, exposure compensation is operated by the rear command dial, and that I've assigned ISO to the AEL AEF button, having these on the front command dial is effectively redundant anyway. In manual mode, my command dials are slightly different as the front dial is now set to aperture and the rear is set to shutter speed. So I need to add exposure compensation to the front dial to control that parameter. I haven't found a way to assign exposure compensation to a custom button, so this is the least worst option. So for SS operation, I have this set on to choose shutter speeds in third stop increments. In contrast, I'd like the ability to change the ISO values to full stop increments, as the number of choices tends to slow me down at times. And having 3 auto ISO ranges is overkill for my needs. And one final thought before we wrap up is I thought I'd really miss having a D-pad on the camera, but the joystick works really well for most purposes. So wrapping up, I've been able to set up the user interface on the X-M5 so I can quickly change exposure parameters and focusing options for photographing my family. The camera is flexible and nicely responsive, and I can even use the camera for activities that involve some action. I brought the X-M5 as a small everyday carry camera, so my lenses are 75mm and shorter, but it handles close-up activities very nicely. This is a great time for when I didn't bring a more action-orientated setup, like my Nikon Z8. The X-M5 mostly gets out of my way, but if I need to quickly adjust parameters on the fly, the X-M5 allows me to do that without diving into the menu. That wraps up this video. If you'd like to see how I set up the focusing options on the X-M5 for action, or setting up the Q menu, let me know in the comments. Thanks for checking out the video. If it's been helpful, please like and subscribe.